You're listening to Why We Do What We Do. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do Mini. I'm your host, Abraham.
And I'm Shane.
And so for these formatted types of episodes, we do a quick dive on something and we try and do it in 15 minutes or less. Sometimes we go over that. Sometimes we go significantly under. And today we're talking about stickers that save businesses money.
Yes, we are. So businesses that require fleets of vehicles have to pay for insurance for their vehicles and trust that their brand and the products carried by said vehicle that sports their brand's logo are treated well and do accrue avoidable costs in damages or bad publicity due to the behavior of their drivers. Basically, what we're saying is we want to make sure our companies, these companies out there, want to make sure that their investments are taken care of and that they have lower insurance premiums.
And also just like general cost of like owning vehicles and wear and tear and stuff of that nature. And so how those vehicles are treated affects their overall profitability if they're having to accrue additional expense from the way that their drivers behave when those vehicles are in operation. So the companies with vehicles emblazoned with their logo, and I want to say that multiple times because it is important and will come up again, that carry that logo that has their brand name that's like on the vehicle itself, you'll see this high visibility reflective sticker on the back or sometimes the sides or sometimes both. And that sticker says, "How's my driving?" with a phone number to call. And the implication here is that you can then call that number to report the driver's behavior.
Ooh, and you're going to get them. So where does this come from? What does a sticker actually really do? And who answers when you call? We've got so many questions about this. I personally have never called a "How's my driving" number.
I was about to ask.
I don't know how this works. I mean, I understand the premise, but I've never done it.
I also have not called one of these numbers. So if listener, you should write in and tell us because I would be interested to hear your story. There was an SNL skit on this where they called 1-800-EAT and that was an actual hotline. And so they would basically listen to their concern and sound all empathetic. And then they would say, "All right, I suggest that you go eat." That was their solution to everything.
I like that.
Yeah, we'll step back from this. So as we said, there are these stickers on the backs of these vehicles that say, "How's my driving?" And then there are also joke ones like the SNL one that won't actually call anything. Anyway, these stickers are credited to someone named George P. Zimmerman. Now, any of you whose hackles raised at that name, understandably, we're not talking about the bad murderer George Zimmerman.
Nope.
George P. Zimmerman with an extra N on the end was a totally different person. So sorry to have gotten your hackles raised.
Yeah.
Anyway, he had a lot of patents and he had a lot of copyrights, things of that nature. I had a hard time pinning down the exact time that this happened. It was like either late 90s or late 80s or early 90s that he invented this idea of the "How's my driving" sticker, or at least it's him that it is credited.
Right. So the idea essentially has three goals. One, to give companies a way to keep track of how their vehicles are being handled. Two, to direct phone calls away from police when drivers make minor infractions. And three, to incentivize driving more carefully and safely if drivers know they are being watched. Those sound like reasonable goals.
Yeah, and then there's like kind of some other bonus goals that are sort of wrapped up in there, which is that a company with its vehicles adorned with these stickers may actually develop a reputation for safe, polite drivers if the stickers are effective at influencing the driver's behavior. So like if people frequently see courteous, polite driving behavior from this company that always has their logo clearly on the vehicle, then they might have some brand association of, oh, those people do a really good job with their, managing their drivers or their trucks or whatever.
Right. And so finally, with increased safety or increased safe, careful driving, that ends up lowering costs for companies in a few different ways. So first, better driving records and safety programs means lower insurance rates, like I mentioned earlier. Fewer incidents means less damage to repair the car or the vehicle itself, and improved longevity of the life of their cars. They get to keep these cars for a longer period of time. They get to use them more often. They get less cost for having to buy a new car. All kinds of really great benefits for the company at large.
Yeah. So again, presuming that the stickers do what the stickers are intended to do, lots of outcomes happening. And I'm saying these things as if I'm leading up to a caveat, and you'll just have to see. So one of the questions I had was, what happens when someone calls the number on one of those stickers? Because you might think you're calling that person's supervisor or the company or even the person themselves. Who knows what you think is happening, but we're going to actually tell you. So these stickers are produced by a company that is not the company that owns those vehicles. And in every instance that I was able to find, it is always a third party. And that means that the phone number on the stickers directs the caller to that third party, the person who owns the sticker. Okay. And that third party, actually, they manage the phone calls for the company, and then they sort of screen and vet and take those phone calls in when people call the number on those stickers. So for many, if not most, or even all of the companies that sell this program, they provide the sticker and the call monitoring service. And there are several of them. So there's not just like a company that produces that sticker and then has this monitoring service where they have basically a call center. They take calls, but there are many companies that do this exact same service. And so they're all competing with each other for the business of people who have fleets of vehicles that will then sport those "How's my driving" stickers.
What a wild thing capitalism is when you think about it. Like, somebody had to start a business that was like, here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you stickers, and we're going to filter out all these complaints and make it so that you can do your business. Like, somebody had to come up with that idea and be like, I'll protect you from the nonsense that you're going to get from these calls.
Yeah. And the wild effects of capitalism, like we have to play ads. Let's continue talking here about what happens with these phone calls.
Yeah, so 24/7, when these third parties get a call, they log the caller's complaint. And if warranted, they forward the complaint to the company who owns the car and the driver's direct supervisor to take action. The call process allows them to vet complaints and get relevant information to the drivers or their supervisors quickly. And they mostly answer 90% of the calls on the first attempt and will get feedback to the driver supervisor within 30 minutes to an hour. That is highly efficient.
Yeah, it's a lot quicker than I would have thought, but that's sort of what they'll boast.
Right.
In addition to that, these centers will also provide a regular sort of, I don't know if they're quarterly or monthly or whatever, but they'll provide regular reports to the company that sort of outlines, here is the data that we've collected on the calls that we've received.
Okay.
So anyway, point being that once that call makes it to a supervisor, that supervisor then they get to make the decision about how to further escalate this, ranging from just noting it in the driver's records to taking the driver off the road or even terminating the employment of that driver. It depends on the nature of the infraction, how many infractions there have been. You know, if someone's like, oh, they wouldn't let me change lanes, I was trying to get over and they wouldn't let me change lanes, like that's probably not going to escalate anything, versus one where like, wow, they just mowed down a street full of people carrying, you know, let's just say they mowed down a street full of people. that's plenty enough to have them be like, okay, they're clearly done. Obviously, in that point, the police are also involved,
right.
But
hopefully
the severity of the infraction will inform what happens after the phone call is made.
Right. And so, as you can imagine, most of the phone calls that these third parties receive, they're complaints. They more or less expect that to be the case. And we rarely recognize people for doing the right thing, but we are very likely to react if something is wrong. That being said, companies get reports from those call centers that allow the companies that own the cars to acknowledge and reward drivers with no complaints or even with positive comments about their driving, so they can acknowledge their employees for maintained safety. So that's kind of a nice thing if they're able to do that and if they get those compliments.
Right. So that means, though, then do people actually even call these numbers? Short answer, yes. Only about 10% of drivers ever receive complaints, which means 90% of drivers don't, who are driving these vehicles.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that 90% of drivers aren't driving in a way that would elicit complaints, but for whatever reason, only about 10% of drivers get a call. The ones that do get called about, they're often mostly complaints about the etiquette of the driver, not as much anything that's dangerous or illegal. So of those 10% that calls come in, so we now are taking, like, of the calls that come in, 85% are about things like improper lane changes, driving through lights or stop signs, or tailgating. So it's not, I mean, driving through lights could definitely be something that's more dangerous and illegal, but most of those are like, It's not great, but it's not the worst thing ever.
Right.
That being said, actually, of the remaining 15%, so at 85%, 10% of calls are actually compliments. There's people calling in to praise the driver's performance. And then about 5% of calls that come in are actual emergencies where like they need to react immediately.
Right.
In all, about 90% of the complaints that come in are about only 10% of the drivers. So, which makes a lot of sense because, as we said, only about 10% of drivers receive any complaints whatsoever. And incidentally, most of the drivers who get called about only ever get one call, which could speak to the effectiveness of the intervention, or it could, maybe something else happens. Maybe those people get fired or what have you, but They usually only get a single call for the calls that come in.
Yeah. And so then the question that we have is, does it work? Do these things work? And ultimately they seem to work, but with a caveat. So a study found that there was a 20% reduction in incidences such as crashes for vehicles that carried the stickers, which resulted in a savings of over 50% of the cost of the operating fleet. So even that small reduction has a pretty significant impact on the company that owns the fleet.
Yes. As we've said many times on this show, prevention is key. If you can prevent, it pays off so substantially to prevent a problem from happening than to clean it up after it has happened. Much like climate change, which this episode is not about, but so much cheaper to invest in preventing the damage than just reacting to the damage as it occurs.
Right, exactly.
Okay. Now, again, a little bit of a caveat here. As we said, there's this 20% reduction, and that implies that you stick the sticker on a vehicle and you get a 20% reduction. It doesn't actually work that way. Putting a sticker on a car with no program in place to give feedback has actually only reduced incidences by about 3%. So a key ingredient of this is the feedback component to the drivers.
Right.
Even the CEO of one of the companies, Paul Farrell, I'm going to guess Farrell, said that the sticker program is part of a battery of safety incentives with such necessary and already existing safety measures as driving history background checks, safe driving classes, and behind the wheel hands-on safety training, and then the feedback component of the calls, meaning that the supervisor gets back to the employee, the driver, and says, this is what happened, this is what you need to do differently moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the actual feedback mechanism and other incentives and training are key, but the sticker does seem to help, and it's extremely cheap, okay? So only about $10 to $20 per vehicle per year for a 50% reduction in cost, and insurance companies will offer lower rates to those companies that use these stickers, which means that it costs little to implement and saves the company a lot of money. So even if it wasn't very effective at improving driving behavior, it might be worth it for companies just to invest in it, just to have, because it seems like it's doing them some good.
Yeah, overall. And I mean, if you imagine $20 per vehicle scaled up to a pretty large fleet, that is a large price tag. But again, we're talking about savings of up to and well over hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Right.
And it does tend to be the case that they offer bulk discounts. So if you have a fleet of vehicles that there's like 30,000 vehicles, you might be on like closer to that $10 per vehicle. And that does put you at $300,000 cost, but you're also again saving hundreds of thousands of dollars in insurance and other, just in insurance alone, you're saving a ton of money. And then plus you, if they're effective, which it does seem like they largely are, then you have less wear and tear on the vehicles, which means they last longer and will require less maintenance. You have fewer accidents, all that sort of thing.
Right.
So my sort of final takeaway here is like, I would like to personally take on calling these numbers more often. And I think feedback to drivers is good. Like, I think we should not shy away from giving feedback when performance is subpar or inadequate. And I think we should lean in on catching good drivers and call when we see them being polite and courteous, when they navigate difficult driving conditions really well, and when they're generally being safe. Call and let them know. It gives the operator something to do, who's on the other end of the line.
Yeah.
And it can further incentivize safe and courteous driving by acknowledging drivers for what they're doing well. And I mean, if you are one of those people and you professionally drive, like, I think you would want to hear like, hey, people noticed you were being really courteous and safe on the road. Thanks, here's a little bonus type of thing. Even if it was just a thanks, I think we'd appreciate that. But I also think it'd be worth it for companies to offer incentive.
Right. Absolutely. I'd want to know. Call more is basically the point of that. Call more often, call and reward people, give them praise, let them know so they can continue to do that and keep our roads safe and keep our babies safe, because everybody's got a baby on board sticker,
Yeah. And if 90% of drivers aren't giving feedback, and probably most of them are doing the right thing, let's try and acknowledge them for doing the right thing rather than just not punishing them doing, the wrong thing.
Right. Exactly.
Let's try and wrap this up really soon, but there were some interesting tidbits that I found. If you're wondering about how drivers feel about this, it's very mixed. Some drivers really like the program. They speak very highly of its effectiveness and that they appreciate the feedback. Some drivers feel that it gives the other drivers on the road permission to kind of be jerks and to go after these professional drivers, like truck drivers, for things that are outside of their control. And then those drivers have no recourse to defend themselves because they just sort of are getting these anonymous feedback things from people on the road, and they don't really get a chance to tell their side of the story necessarily for all of these. So I think it's a mixed bag, but there does seem to be some amount of support for it from the people that this directly affects and some amount of opposition. So something to consider.
Right. Now, these may be on any type of vehicle that is part of a company fleet, ranging from small sedans to light, medium, and heavy pickup trucks and big rigs. So you're going to see these stickers all over the place. It's not explicit to like commercial driving or anything like that. Like it may be for specific companies that have those smaller cars too.
Now, interestingly, I found, and this is from that same guy, the Paul Farrell guy, there are a lot of companies that will have vehicle fleets and they don't put their logo on those vehicles. And if they don't put their logos on those vehicles, so they're unmarked and anonymous, they'll actually avoid using those How's My Driving stickers because they're concerned that doing so will mark those vehicles as belonging to a fleet and may actually motivate people to do things like try and exploit that company by staging crashes or calling it in whatever way they're trying to essentially wring money out of those companies that manage those vehicle fleets. So they might actually avoid putting those stickers on cars if those cars don't have the company's logo, because they don't want people to try and go after those cars so that they can extort a little money out of the company who owns the fleet of vehicles.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And it can be, I could see people doing that. I mean, there was all those stories from the 90s that like you'd hear about. I remember when I first started driving, I was so worried about getting boxed in.
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever remember that. I was so worried about that.
Sure. Yeah, totally. All right. Well, we ran along on this mini. It was kind of a longy mini, so I think we'll cap it out there unless you have anything to add or anything that I forgot, Shane.
I got nothing else.
Perfect. Thank you all for listening. Check out our full-length episodes released on Mondays or on Wednesdays, minis on Mondays, mini Mondays. Hey, that was not intentional, but I like it.
Hey, look at that.
And that's how you can get more Why We Do What We Do. Otherwise, this is Abraham.
And this is Shane.
Why We Do What We Do mini is out.
Bye.
You've been listening to Why We Do What We Do. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to www.wwdpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you have an awesome day.